I have to say, this is intimidating. You are an incredible group of people. I am going to be the dumbest person in the room tonight. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. That'll be me. Yeah. You represent 90 countries, which means I think most of you don't know who the heck I am. That's fine. Check out YouTube. I am not the star tonight, of course. I'm just here to moderate. And I'm here to welcome now President Bill Clinton. Let's get him out here. Ladies and gentlemen. How are you?
Good. Where am I sitting? Here?
Yeah, have a seat right here. This is the most boring talk show set I've ever seen in my life. Thank you so much for being here. This is such an impressive group of young people. I want to say on a personal note, when President Clinton was in office, he was kind enough to invite me to the White House many times, which was the thrill of a lifetime. So thank you very much for that. Never invited under President Bush. Obama, I just snuck in a few times. But I do have a personal interest in the Clinton Global Initiative. I have two children. I have a 12-year-old daughter and I have a 10-year-old son, and increasingly I'm more and more concerned about the world that they're going to inherit. And so I very much appreciate that this is about action. This is about taking action, getting the job done, and solving problems in a practical way. The first question I wanted to ask is, this is a very unusual group of young people, as you know. They are highly intelligent, they are motivated, but like a lot of highly intelligent, motivated young people, they are also ambitious by nature. How do you get them to balance that ambition, that drive to accomplish things in their personal life with their desire to maybe achieve things, for the initiative?
They deserve all the credit for that.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are in schools that promote community service and kind of entrepreneurial ideas to solve problems. But, I find that more than any generation I've ever seen, I grew up in the 60s. We were activists. We were for civil rights generally. We wanted to get rid of the war in Vietnam. We wanted to reduce poverty. But we thought the way we should be activists is to protest, elect, expect the government to do it. We live in a time now where the greatest good news stories of the last 25 years is the rise of citizen activism to actually make positive change. And what we know is it works best when you get different groups of people with different skills to work in creative teams, and it's even better if they work in partnership with business and with government. So it's incredibly empowering, but they deserve all the credit. They're motivated to do it. What we try to do is bring people together so that they can discuss their different ideas and come up with commitments that really have a chance to change the future. And a number of them have, and a number of them will. We're at Cal Berkeley. The university students here committed to do more in the significant refugee population over in Oakland, to try to develop STEM education, to try to develop their ability to use the internet in a positive way and prepare them not only educationally, but to find useful employment and solve a lot of their other problems. Another one was interested in recycling. That sounds like second nature in Northern California, but their hook was, in order for this to ever take, we got to figure out a way for it to become a profitable, sustainable business. And so it really should be a gold mine if you do it right. That's just two commitments from one school, but you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Most of these young people want their lives to have some meaning beyond doing well in school and beyond doing well in their own careers.
What I'm interested in is, you said a quote. You said you thought this generation, I'm talking about the generation of young men and women right here, right now, is the most poised of any generation, in your opinion, that you've seen to make real change. Now, you've lived through a few generations. There's Gen X, that's not a knock. I have too. We both have. But you've deemed this generation to be the one that you think is most poised. Why? Why do you think that?
Because they ask the how question more. And because they live in the most interdependent, connected time in history, and because they're the most comfortable with our diversity in all of its manifestations. Look at this crowd. They're most comfortable. As a nation, we're less sexist, racist, and homophobic than we used to be. but they really, really have been on the cutting edge of all these movements. And they find diversity stimulating and monotony boring. And the only thing they have to resist is America's last remaining bigotry. We just don't seem to want to be around anybody who disagrees with us anymore, which seems to be a problem right across the political spectrum. So they get in here and they have these constructive disagreements and arguments and try to find ideas because they're focused on ultimately making a decision and making a difference in other people's lives in whatever way they choose. And it's incredibly empowering to know that you don't have to be, quote, in power to do something that improves the future.
Now, obviously, this is a heady experience. They're here, they're in this room right now, and this is palpably exciting. How do you get them to perpetuate this when they leave this environment? And this has got to be a lot of fun and invigorating. They leave this environment and they go out into their communities or they go out in the globe. How do you get them to take the energy that they have here and really maintain that sense of commitment?
Well, first of all, one of the purposes of asking them to come here is to re-energize them. They got here because they were already doing things. Mm-hmm. These students all applied to come here. And there's no admission charge. Those who can afford it have to pay their expenses, and otherwise we raise a fund to try to bring people here from all over the world and from all over the country and all income groups so that it's not a barrier. But most of them get jazzed enough meeting other people that when they go home, they have even more intense interest in doing this than they did when they came here. That's the whole purpose of having this meeting. And also, they've all got a job to do now because they said, usually not individuals, usually significant numbers of people make a commitment to do something, and then they don't want to be the one group that didn't do it.
Right.
Or at least get caught trying.
Right.
And that's the other thing we try to...
So we'll shame you if you don't do what you're supposed to do.
No shaming, but I'm going to give you...
I'll shame you, not you. I will shame you.
We started this a couple of years before I started CGIU with the Clinton Global Initiative. And we did it just basically because I thought it was frustrating to keep going to these really interesting meetings around the world and having all these brilliant people talk about all these problems and nobody ever had to do anything about it.
Right.
So I had this crazy idea that if you had a meeting and you said, look, the real price of entry is you got to commit to do something about what you're talking about. And now over 90% of our commitments are in teams, because diverse groups make better decisions than lone geniuses. You know, if you could instantaneously pick the person in this crowd with the highest IQ and you babied them in the nicest suite in the nearest hotel for 2 days, and the rest of us were just locked up here with cold coffee, and you fed 10 questions in to the genius and to us, over 2 days, the rest of us would make better decisions, because diverse groups make better decisions. And so that's really what we try to do. We try to create a community in which people are empowered individually because they're working together to solve a common goal. And I think that's what works all over the world. That's what we need in the United States. That's what everybody needs. They need inclusive economics, inclusive societies, and inclusive governance. Governance defined as any decision making that deals with the public good. So it can be in the government or in private business policy or in the non-governmental world, or what I prefer when all three are working together.
Just on a personal note, I yesterday visited YouTube and I met with all the people that work at YouTube, and I was stunned how young they are, how diverse, what a diverse group of people there are. And I think the thing that struck me the most is how many women. I felt like the majority of the people calling the shots there are women, which was absolutely incredible. And YouTube has completely revolutionized my business, and I think for the good. So it's a very powerful thing to see.
And ours too. I mean, you know, it's amazing. You get a few people following around on YouTube, and all of a sudden, somebody comes up to you and tells you what you said.
Yes.
You know, and it doesn't have to be in 8 seconds. I mean, there actually are people, if they self-select you, and you have something to say, they'll actually read it, digest it, and come back at you, and that's really important.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Twitter too. I think it's very, valuable. But I like the idea that a very large swath of young people don't really believe that you can encapsulate a problem and a solution in 8 or 10 seconds. That it's, answering the how question is maybe the biggest challenge of the 21st century. We can all articulate what our problems are. Most of us, and I wish all of us could articulate what our great opportunities are, but figuring out how to seize the opportunities and to minimize the problems, that requires a little more thought and a little more discussion. And the willingness to fail. That's the other thing I was going to say is when we started the CGI program around the United Nations, we encouraged people to report when they tried and failed, because we learned a lot from the roughly 6 or 8% of our reporting commitments who said, we tried to do this, we didn't make it, here's why. We've learned a lot from that, and we share that too. When we had the opening panel, the young man who founded Pinterest said this was his third business, and the first two failed and he didn't know why, and this one succeeded and he wasn't sure. He was wonderful in his humility, but over the course of the session, I think everybody here would say they got the feeling that this was a very special person, and he was not easily deterred, even though he wasn't overbearing. And I think that's something we all have to learn.
Now, you've been hearing some ideas while you've been here, some pitches, some concepts. Is there anything that's grabbed your imagination that you've heard, since you've been here?
Oh, a lot. But the thing that I'm always interested in are the things that I think go right at the heart of something we're dealing with. We had last night on our opening panel the founder of Muslim Girls. And Amani was talking about how important it was for Muslim women to be self-confident in America, and just by the power of their example to assert the expectation of equal and fair treatment, the absence of discrimination, and in so doing to empower others to do the same. That's a big deal now with the way a lot of people in public life are talking fast and loose about America's Muslim population, which I think is one of our great strengths, is that we have people here from everywhere, from all kinds of faith traditions, with all kinds of politics. And one of the things that is really important we have to understand is the great battle for the future is not even in ISIS land, although I think that's important. I can't stand the way those people have gone after the Yazidis and all the other minority religions, and the way they've subjected women and girls to sexual abuse and, beheaded people and all that. But most of this battle is taking place on the social media. So to have someone who lives in that space, who's proud of being here, proud of who she is, and proud of her tradition, trying to empower other people, including younger people at more fragile ages, is a big deal. That's just one example. And Salman Khan was here talking about how he built the Khan Academies and how it's turning now into an attempt to basically create a global education culture. And all we have to do is now figure out how to get last mile delivery, which we've been struggling with for some time, driving down the cost of laptops, figuring out how to charge them and recharge them in remote areas and all of that. But he made it sound fun and interesting and acted like he was just a successful geek who stumbled into this trying to help a relative do better in math. I suspect there was more to it than that, but not much. I mean, that's the other thing. We all have to, the thing I liked about his presentation and the people that have made almost spontaneous commitments here out of their own experience is that it's very important to keep your eyes open for what's going on right around you. When I was a little younger man and I left the White House and I wrote my autobiography, my editor had edited some of the great fiction writers of the late 20th century, and he called me, he said, I gave him the first 150 pages, he said, "This is a great story." He said, "How much did you make up?" I said, "No, it all really happened." He said, "You got to be kidding." I said, "No, it really did." He said, "Did you know any sane people when you were growing up?" I said, "Probably not, but neither did anybody else. I just was taught to pay attention." And that's what I like about so many of these young people have these relatively unique commitments because they were paying attention. I suspect most children are paying attention. I suspect your kids are going to do just fine because they were paying attention to you in ways of which you were not aware. And so anytime somebody comes up with a commitment, like this Muslim girl's commitment, or like the Khan Academy, and then tries to make it, you know, the humongous thing it is, and then says, but still not reaching everybody, help me figure out how to reach everybody. I know that's somebody that was paying attention. Just in Simon's case, to a relative and who'd held it with math.
It's interesting because my very next question that I plan to ask is something that you got into, but I'd like to get more specific, which is we are, because of the campaign we're in right now, there is a wave of xenophobia that's being stoked up by certain politicians that are trying to prey on people's fears about the greater world, saying America should withdraw, America shouldn't be involved, we should be careful about who comes in and who doesn't come in. And I'm wondering, as you know, this has happened before in American history. It's something that recurs, but you face the unique struggle, and everyone here faces the unique struggle of creating a global effort. Is it harder? Do you ever worry that it's going to become more difficult to have a global initiative when, right now, maybe in America, some people's fears are being stoked?
Sure, because like when I took office as president, it was a very different time. We had some problems. There was this horrible war in Bosnia. Mm-hmm. We were about a year and a half away, a little less than a year and a half away from the Rwandan genocide. There was ongoing troubles in the Middle East, but it was ripe then for a long resolution, and we had 7 years of relative peace and quiet there, interrupted by sporadic incidences of violence. But we thought we could put the world together. My predecessor, the first President Bush, said at the end of the Cold War, there should be a new world order. That was a little too rigid, but we did have a chance to create a new world of partnerships and alliances and general understandings. And that created the climate in which all over the world, these non-governmental groups were rising. I remember Hillary was the first person, because she always did a lot of this work, to convince me that when I went to India, when I went to Turkey, when I went to African countries, I should also meet with people like all of these young people, their predecessors, who were trying to end female genital mutilation in African countries and solve all kinds of problems in India and Turkey. But you have to make this work, there has to be a sense of coming together, of the potential of it. And what's happened is a combination of the largest refugee population unleashed out of a variety of places since the end of World War II, the decision of Russia to pursue a more expansionist policy, unease in East Asia because of China and their conflicts, not military so far, with their smaller neighbors, and the resurgence of an aggressive North Korea, and the global economic crisis and its aftermath, which has led to a lot of nationalist feeling and collective insecurity because people have been so long without any economic growth and any prospects. That's fueled a lot of what's going on in Greece, but it also has an impact all across Europe. Europeans have a great history of taking in immigrants, but their generosity is tempered, I think, by their anxieties over their own positions. And that's what led in the UK to the vote in part for the Scottish nationalists to secede, and now the vote for whether Britain should secede from the European Union. That would have been unthinkable. There was a legitimate argument in the UK not to join the euro because they had an independent global financial leadership, but they wanted to be in the European Union. So that's what happens when things begin to fall apart. It's hard. They all feed on each other, the economic, the political. Then you stoke these deep psychological fears, because you think about it. When all of you think about it, whenever you feel really insecure, where do you feel best? I want to go home. Whatever home is. And the psychological home of most people is with people who look like them, think like them, had the same life they had. And it's exactly the wrong response in an interdependent world, because no matter how much you try to stop it, you can't end our interdependence. But I'm not surprised by it. I just think we need to rise above it. And you can't be afraid, because one of the things that happens with interdependence is, if you want to claim all the benefits, it's like anything that happens in life. There is no perfect gift. No perfect. You have to accept that there will be some risks. You know, we've been debating in America what to do with the guy's cell phone that was involved in the San Bernardino thing. Should Apple help the FBI? Then the FBI says, okay, you don't have to help us. We figured out a way to get in there anyway.
Right.
You say, oh my God, is my Apple phone secure? I mean, you know, it's all this endless stuff. Look, you are living in an interdependent age, which in ways large and small reflects the ongoing conflict between the forces of positive interdependence and the forces of negative interdependence. Your job, no different than Conan's or mine, is to build up the positive and shrink the negative, and to recognize that you can't create a perfect world, you can only create a better world. And you can make it better every day. And you can't make it better by running away and hiding and pretending that it doesn't exist.
I want to talk about, since it's been clear to everyone that since you left office, the rise in partisanship has become more and more and more extreme. It probably, when you were president, seemed pretty tough, but it has gotten to the point where we're deadlocked on a Supreme Court justice. It can seem almost comical at times to people in my business, but it's really not that funny. And so I'm curious, do you think the president, any president now, has the power to break this kind of deadlock? I think some Americans are starting to feel that this is insurmountable.
I know that they may be right, but I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. I think, again, I think the problem was aggravated by the decision of the Supreme Court in 2000 to decide the presidential race without recounting the votes in Florida. And then there was 9/11. Then we came together for a while. In America and around the world, it's almost impossible to remember. They were waving American flags in Paris and on every continent in solidarity with us after all these people were murdered on 9/11, including more than 200 American Muslims. I'm not talking about the people that were involved in the attack, Americans living here. And so instead of adopting inclusive economics and inclusive politics, we went in the other direction. Although I have to say that the second President Bush, for all of our disagreements, at least was the last major Republican figure to generally favor immigration reform. He was willing to take his chances that he could convince enough new Americans to support him and what he believed in. And it's something he deserves credit for. I mean, he went to a mosque and met with Muslim leaders after 9/11 and said, our enemy is terror, not your faith. And that was a gift that we could all work with. And so then it just got worse and worse. And you had this Tea Party movement of people who believed the rather extremist anti-government rhetoric. And they said, how about the reality? And then our people got discouraged, a lot of people in my party, and didn't vote in midterms. So the Republicans began to lose presidential elections, but win at midterms the governorships, the state legislators. And they did what politicians always do if there's no balance. They overdid the redistricting so that they wound up with all these members of Congress who were far more worried about a primary challenge than being elected in a general election. So it undermined the center. There could be no dynamic center if you knew you were going to win your seat if you got your nomination. And we began to drift apart. And then a lot of big money, the Citizens United decision, I think, was a very bad decision because basically hung a for sale sign on our democracy. So President Obama was unusually gifted. And after the crash in 2008, you know, he would have been elected. Anybody who had a beating pulse on our ticket would have won that because of what happened, because the Iraq War was unpopular and because the economy was in a tank. But he was able to get reelected because he did a better job than they were giving him credit for and because he had a good campaign. And yet we've made barely a dent in the congressional polarization or the polarization in the states. I think it's now possible that it will change. First, because I believe we are just this close to being able to restore more broadly shared economic growth. There is too much inequality. But we're this close to being able to flip it and start rising together again. And if that happens, and I believe it will, then it will diminish the tensions in our country between people of different religious and racial and ethnic and even political groups. It will make dialogue slowly more possible. It will also help the European economy and our neighbors. We'll do better. And I think then the Congress will have to decide whether they can best hold on to their jobs by making something good happen or just saying no. In the end, look, most people, I don't care how political they are, do not get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and say, oh, goody, I can go spend one more day making sure not one thing happens in the United States and blaming it on the president. I just don't think it just violates human nature, and we've about played that out. It's an old, stale, tired tune. So, yes, I'm pretty optimistic.
I'm going to throw it over to, that's good to hear you're optimistic. Let's give optimism a hand, shall we?
Well, wait a minute. I'm not naive, but if you look at it, this country's been counted out many times. From the time that George Washington was being made fun of for never having won a military battle till the Revolutionary War and having a bad set of false teeth, all the way that Abraham Lincoln was called a baboon right before he took office, and one newspaper in his own home state said we'd be better off if he didn't live to take the oath of office. I mean, a lot of people have counted us out. So far, they have all lost money. Everybody that bet against us has lost money because no matter how foolish we seem and how many crazy mistakes we make, in the end, Churchill's right. The United States winds up doing the right thing after exhausting every other alternative. And I guess what I think is we have exhausted all these bad alternatives, and it may be time for us to get the show on the road. These young people from all over the world may be more emblematic of our future than our immediate past, and we all better hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have to ask you, I'm not doing my job if I don't ask. You're talking about crazy. In the unlikely event that Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States, in the unlikely event, do you know which country you're moving to? I've picked out Holland, by the way. I love Holland.
Yeah, me too.
Holland's in the house.
Yeah, and the Dutch postcode lottery is one of the biggest supporters of my foundation, so I'm grateful. I think I'll stay and fight on. It's what I've always done.
Good.
But look, you know, I'm a big believer if you're involved in a race, and when I'm not doing this work, I am, you never look past this fight to the next one, otherwise you may not get there. So I think I really hadn't given a lot of thought to that, except in the end, it's likely to give the American people a clear choice about what kind of country we are. And maybe it's high time in the 21st century that we come to terms with the implications of our interdependence, the implications of our diversity, the implications of our potential. What are our obligations and opportunities to our native people, who are still the poorest Americans? What are our obligations and our opportunities to the emerging nations in Africa and Latin America? What about all those poor people from Central America who are coming here because they have the highest murder rates in the world in Guatemala and Honduras, and the highest in El Salvador, and the states aren't strong enough to protect them from the narco-traffickers that are wending their way through Central America into Mexico and then in the United States? We need to talk about that, and maybe, you know, it won't be a reality TV show. Maybe we'll get a chance to take it beyond 8 seconds and decide who we are, and what we believe in, and how we think change best occurs. And, you know, some cynics made fun of my candidate in this race when she said she thought we needed more love and kindness in our politics, not in being tough in our disagreements, that's important, but honest to goodness, it's exhausting. You know, I watched that Republican debate where those three guys literally wouldn't stop talking over each other's voices for 45 seconds, calling each other liars. That's not a good thing. And it's not a nice picture for these young people to see, whether they're from America or around the world. We just need to rise above this. We need to rise. And we better make up our minds that we got to rise together. And I don't think, let me just make one last point about this. So I'm a Democrat, and most people in the,
I see reporters rushing to the phone.
But wait.
He's a Democrat, I tell you.
But I'll give you an example. So most of the people in Appalachia, for cultural reasons, are voting heavily Republican. But our party has an obligation not to stop fighting climate change, but to realize that West Virginia has the second weakest economy in America and the highest rate of prescription drug and heroin abuse. And the two things are not unrelated, because we have never done anything. We're not good in our country historically on transition economics. And it is morally wrong, even when you're saving the planet, to leave somebody behind on the field of battle for whom you have an obligation. And you can go all over this country and find places that have been left out and behind. You can go all over the world. You know, I spend a lot, our foundation works in the area of northern Nigeria, which has been dominated by Boko Haram. And for 50 cents a person, you can keep kids from dying of waterborne diseases, principally diarrhea, but also dysentery and cholera. And we haven't been hurt there, our people. But the unemployment rate there in the predominantly Muslim area, most vulnerable to Boko Haram, is 3 times the unemployment rate in the Lagos area, the most populous part of the country, where we also work. Every country in the world needs to start asking, can we be a nation if we don't have a policy for inclusive economics, for transition economics, for helping people to begin again? You can't just do it with transfer payments, because in the end, people want to be empowered. They want you to come see them because you want to take a trip, not because you've got them on a drip, drip, drip of dependence that lasts. I'm all for helping people in need, but we're still working in Haiti, and we still got about $350 million more worth of commitments of investments there to put people to work and let them create their own future. And we're not good at it. We got to get good at that. And we can't worry about the political parties or the preferences of the people we're trying to help. If they're in our crowd, in our country, or in our neighborhood, or in our city, we need to find a way to have inclusive economics. It will moderate the politics more than anything could.
One last quick question from me, and then we're going to throw it open to the floor. But in just a couple of months, President Obama is going to finish his second term. Very few people know what that's like. You've experienced that. What would your advice be to President Obama when he leaves office? Would you tell him, take 6 months, take the phone off the hook, and just sleep? Watch cartoons? I mean, what would you tell him to do? Get involved right away?
Well, first of all, I've supported him, and as I've said repeatedly, I think he's done a better job than he often gets credit for, because it takes 10 years. For 400 years, we have good economic history. For 400 years, it's taken any country that has the kind of severe economic crash we had 10 years to fully recover from. We got our jobs back in 7.5, but not our incomes. That's why I think we're this close now to going through again. But my advice to him now is to follow his heart. But I think that he will feel, as I always have, from the day I left office. One, I think when you're an ex-president, if your successor asks you to do something, without regard to party, if you can do it in good conscience, you ought to do it, because you were given an opportunity few people get. Second, I think if you're like him, if you're young and vigorous, and you have the kind of social conscience, local and global, he does, you want to find a way to put your experience and knowledge and contacts to work, solving some of the problems and seizing some of the opportunities you cared most about when you're in office. How he will do that, I don't know. It's up to him. But I think he will find the most happiness there. You know, it's sort of like he'll get to go back to his roots as a community organizer, except the world can be his community. And I think that I expect him to have a wonderful second act. I expect her, Michelle, to have a wonderful second act. And I can't wait.
Yeah.
And I expect him to be just as proud of his daughters as I am of mine.